So, we're talking about panpsychism today, and it's a theory, it's a philosophical view that consciousness is a feature of reality in the universe. That it's not the universe is not simply mathematical equations that explain itself, but there's a never another deeper level of consciousness that is included in all things. That's, to my understanding, if I can sum it up, that's a way to view it. And I'm wondering, I'm here with Dr. Thomas, and I'm wondering what differences there are in panpsychism and theory of absolutes, and how they complement each other, if so.
That's a really important question. I would say that there's no difference, at least on a large scale, between the theory of absolutes and panpsychism. It's not the normal panpsychism. I would call it a Christian version of panpsychism. There may be people that would consider that to be an oxymoron, that to say Christian and panpsychism, that I think probably some people would consider that heretical, consider it to be absolutely mutually exclusive, that is not the way the universe is built. And I will have to, I guess, await those kind of criticisms to know how to answer that question. I'm not sure if that will be a big problem with people. I'm hoping not. But I know that it isn't a typical Christian way of framing the universe, that the universe is conscious, that the rocks or the trees, even though Jesus said that they would cry out if he was, I just read that verse. There was something that if they didn't allow this to be done, that even the rocks and hills, maybe it was the rocks and hills, would cry out. That kind of points at a panpsychism, a universe that's actually alive. It's not like just humans are the only ones with consciousness, with a soul, with a spirit, with something going on other than being inanimate. Background characters, cardboard. So I think there's sufficient precedent in the Bible that we could use biblical verses to substantiate the idea that at least it wasn't prohibited. I don't think that we could say anywhere in the Bible that it describes anything like what I'm proposing, but I don't think it is mutually exclusive. And so I'm hoping that that will be a general viewpoint. People will then be open to accepting this perspective because it is the foundation of my worldview, my perspective, and it is why I became a Christian. Being an intellectual, being completely rational, being totally grounded on everything, I just couldn't accept something that doesn't make sense. And this was the keyhole that Christianity crawled through to be able to enter my consciousness and my sense of scientific validity and cause-effect relationship to be able to justify it. So you want to read kind of just without, you want to kind of state the question again?
Sure. In what ways, so we look at panpsychism as the consciousness of everything, or everything being of the same, like everything being a neighbor to another thing, and collectively the way I see it, collectively embodying the universe. So, um, in what ways is if we can look at the world around us and see it as conscious, um, in what ways is it conscious, and where does that consciousness come from? And a lot of people will have problems with rocks being conscious or the idea that a tree is conscious. And I don't think that you're saying or that panpsychism is necessarily saying that it's conscious in the same way that we understand human consciousness, but there may be a level of intelligence that is regarded as conscious or operates as somewhat conscious. So how is the universe that we're a part of conscious beyond our own consciousness?
Yes, that is the question. Well, as we've gone through before, my kind of origin and genesis of the universe was I just assumed God existed and don't know what else to do. I don't know where to say he came from or how he could. I don't know how he could have started from nothing, and I don't know how he could have existed forever. And so I'm both of the methods of creation of something that's a first cause. I'm checkmated. I have no clue how you could boot this system up to even get started. That to me is the fundamental mystery. I stand in awe at it. I have no explanation whatsoever, and I will not even, I can't even attempt. I can't even make a guess that would be even plausibly possible. So, having noted that, I said the Father created the Son, declared the Son into existence. The Son declared the conscious points into existence, being that he made everything. And the conscious points then were the substance from which subatomic particles were made, which gathered together to form atoms, which gathered together to form molecules, which then form two. There's a bifurcation. One type of molecule goes in the direction of organic life, and the other goes in the direction of inorganic life. So we have organic life being things like I think if I had to make a definition of life, which is not clear by any means. If I had to make a definition, I would say that it's anything that is able to maintain cellular metabolism. It's a kind of a rudimentary, it's not technical, it's not deep or nuanced, but just kind of looking back at the whole thing, I just go, I don't see life any place other than as a multiplication of a cellular entity. You can get single cells, and those are alive, and you can put a bunch of them together, two of them together, and they're alive, and you can put a whole bunch in lots of different types and have them specialize and form organs and systems and organisms and make really complex. But the bottom line was that you got cells. And if you don't have cells, you don't have life. And the place where it breaks off, and I had to kind of, in my definition, make a decision whether there was whether viruses were alive. And I don't think so. I don't think that I would have to call them it's kind of proto-life. It's a part of life. It's a piece that's needed and can be turned into life, but it doesn't have all the machinery around it to produce life. It just sits there completely inert as a rock. viruses do nothing until they invade a cell. And in which case, if they invaded a cell, which we've already by declaration stated that it's living, it then is very much living. It's direct in the cell. But before that, it wasn't alive. And so it seems as though there's kind of like a minimum amount of stuff that's necessary to get to the, it's not stuff that's not tight enough. It's a minimum number of systems. Let's call each of these different organelles. In a cell, you don't have livers and kidneys and spleen and heart and stuff, but you have analogs of all of those things, and you have like ribosomes and the nucleus, and you've got these Golgi bodies and mitochondria, which probably were another type of bacteria, probably an archaea. It's a different type of thing, very similar to bacteria, but it's a cellular kind of a thing. And it probably incorporated, the archaea was incorporated into the mitochondria. And so that's probably, but again, that was just a note to note that that was one of the organs that's inside the cell. And you don't have that, then you got to have chloroplasts. If you don't have chloroplasts, you got to have mitochondria. You got to have something to create energy. And so plants have chloroplasts and they're alive, they got cells. And animals of all sorts have mitochondria. Some of them don't, in which case they're kind of dependent on other mechanisms. But all that to say that I'm just creating kind of a premise here that the cell is the first layer of life. And that, again, to go back to my pathway, we went on one way, which was creating all these organelles that then were assembled together and put inside an envelope, lipid layer, bilipid layer, and it became a cell. And then the other one went another way, and it formed crystals and layers and aggregates and stuff. But it was not alive. And so, even if there's consciousness there, it's not alive in the sense that we're talking about alive in this conversation right now, where live is something that's cellular based, and then you got these inorganic compounds which are inorganically based. And so the issue that we encounter with panpsychism is that we're saying that I'm saying, and other people, I'm not the only person, this isn't even a small branch of philosophy, but panpsychism is typically considered that the whole universe is conscious. The whole, it's made of little tiny consciousness, or the whole thing is conscious, and then everything in it is kind of like a part of that consciousness. And my theory is both. It just depends on which way you want to look at it. You've got God starting out with the whole thing, and then he kind of creates the Son, who created everything else, and all those tiny little particles agglomerate. Like, just to go over that real quickly, agglomerate till you got a plus and minus electromagnetic conscious point, you got a plus and minus quark conscious point, the plus and minus EMCPs. Those, if you got one that's not bound, if you surround it with dipole particles, which are the plus and minus electromagnetic conscious points that are bound together. Started out with a universe that had a lot of these things. Nothing was bound to anything. And there's only matter because we've got a little extra of the matter of the electron type and a little extra of the quark type. And so as a result, we have more mass than antimatter and I don't think it's because of K on decay, of a what do you call it? Lack of exact connection between lack of balance, exact balance. But the point is, I'm saying you've got these particles that created these plus minus dipole particles. Dipole particles fill up all of space. They conduct photons. They carry electromagnetic energy. They are the medium that is polarized properly and it creates gravity. It polarizes to create fields such as electromagnetic fields. So all of the stuff that we see that are considered force and things in physics, it's the dipole C is the medium. It's space. It is the stuff of space. Space is filled with dipole particles. And the plus points and the minus points that are separate, they got extra plus quarks, extra minus electron quark. You got extra quark type conscious particles, you got extra electron types conscious particles. Those surround themselves with dipole particles. Those become real particles of mass. They then congeal. They then create, first you got the conscious point creating an electron. First you got a group creating a quark, and then once you got that, you can have three quarks together, create a proton, another three quarks, got a neutron. Combine those together, then you got an electron and neutron, you got a nucleus, then you've got electrons on the outside, and they can have various levels and various energies. And so right there is probably a good place to just start and say, how did we go from a conscious point to an electron, and is the electron conscious? In what kind of way is the electron conscious? Does that seem like a good place to start?
That's kind of where I was thinking, what is it that like, how is it conscious? If it's conscious, say this conscious point that leads, a few steps down the line to this particle that has the capacity to become a cell or organize together to be a cell. And say cell life is like, that's when life is as we know it, life at the smallest degree. What are the steps before that? And are they not life? Are these particles not all somehow alive because they're working and forming together? Or are they just, what's where does how do we view them as conscious points?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good point. Okay, well, let's see if we can make any progress on breaking that up. To begin with, we've got this God particle, this thing that God actually is. And I don't know I don't think he's a God started out as like a human kind of like form, arms, legs, head, etc., floating in space, and he was conscious. That doesn't make any sense to me. So we're made in the image of God, and we say, well, we're this way, so God must be that way. So we've got God there floating in space, and that must be what God was like. And that doesn't make sense to me.
Feels too
And so, do you?
Yeah. No, it feels like a fiction. It's we're projecting our own. It's like if we were to make God in our image, that's how we imagine ourselves, but that's not necessarily the image that we're talking about, I think.
Yeah. And typically there is an image of what God is. I mean, you have the old man, beard. He's majestic robes, throne, angels, and that's God. And that God might have surrounded himself with that. That might actually be if we ever see God, and I don't know if we will or not. I'm not sure, but I know we'll see the Son. I'm certain of that. But I just don't know about seeing the Father, at least in his primal glory. I'm not sure that will ever happen. But that primal glory, that initial kind of who God actually is at the center, like we know we're not this shape. We know that there's something inside of us that is
That's how we
eternal, and it's
identify
not.
ourselves more so. Well, I mean, I identify myself more so with what's in here than what's out here.
Mhm.
Both of them grow and decay in different ways, but I think one decays more and one grows more. And hopefully, I'm betting on the inner image of myself. So yeah, so going back, it's not God as a physical form or an image of a human being, but
Mhm.
it's the energy of creation in whatever however we want to explain it. God as like the prime force. Uh,
Mhm. So if we're to try and actually have a visualization of what God was initially, what I keep coming back to, it might be wrong, but just what my concept is that God actually would be a point of consciousness that in some way he had actually surrounded himself with his qualities. So, if we start with, a simple single point of existence, and that would be kind of like if we're going to build God, I would start with existence, simply I am, and possibly, having something that simple and having that simple point of consciousness be something that could actually look inside itself and actually be aware of itself, to me, that for right there, that's a miracle. I mean, if that's possible, if that particular ability, if God can say, "I am," I exist because I think, therefore I am. If God can actually think and and to think, you need an object of consciousness. You can't think about nothing. You're not thinking if you're asleep, if you're thinking of nothing. And so there has to be an object of contemplation. If it's only white and you don't recognize you're here and you only see white or black, then it's not, there's nothing. And there's no consciousness, even if you're aware of it, if there's nothing that compares anything with anything else. There's no distinction. There's just is. At the moment you say, okay, I am watching white or I'm watching black, you have something different there. You have an observer watching white. And that's okay. It has to get to that point. But if it never gets to the point of observer watching white, observer watching black, it never booted up. It never got off of dead zero. It was the universe had to start somewhere. So this is the genesis of God, is what we're talking about, of course. And so again, this is another one that we can't know the answer to. It's unfathomable how that initial concept of God saying, I am visualizing black. Looked on the face of the deep, there was nothing there, but I knew I was here and black was there. So again, this is a miracle. It came out of nothing. And the Latin phrase ex nihilo came out of nothing.
yeah.
So that right there would be the first layer of God. God will just postulate that it's an axiom. We have to say, we just assume it. We assume God at some point in his genesis of becoming God as a being was able to go, I am, and it's black there. At that point, once we've gone over that edge, over that cliff, up over that cliff, and we're above that, at that point, we can create an entire creation. The entire creation is possible at that point. Until that point, it's not possible. So the method by which God could have gone from point, seeing black, he could say, well, that's black there. Not a very interesting life. All eternity, going to sit here and look at black. And he could have then said, okay, I'm going to choose the things that I like to feel. What would you like to feel if you were sitting there looking at black all the time, all day? And if it was me, I would say, well, I would like to feel good. I'd like to feel, this is swell. This is great. I love it, And so that liking is a word similar to loving. And so we see in Scripture that God is love. And so this may be the point in which, in the genesis of God, where he chose a nature. And he said, I'm going to like living. I'm going to love being. I'm going to love existing, seeing blackness. And I'm going to appreciate that experience of seeing blackness. And then he says, okay, well, that was good. That worked. What's the next thing we could do? We could create time. To do that, we need to have a sequence of things. We could create objects, in which case you'd have to have, lots of other things to look at besides just yourself. And so you'd have to kind of differentiate the darkness into objects. And I could create, not just black, I could create something that was other than black. So you could create black and white. So that's a pretty simple, next thing to do would be to create light. And it might be at that point what he chose, instead of creating light per se, that what he did was he duplicated himself. He was already aware of himself. He was aware of the blackness, and he was loving it. And he could say, I think I'm going to create myself looking at myself. That way I'll have at least somebody else with me. And so he doesn't have anybody else to kind of multiply. He can't do reproductive type of activities because there's nobody to reproduce with or from except himself. And so reproducing himself, he basically does mitosis, and he basically duplicates himself. And the way I visualized it is that basically he said, if he was able to come out of nothing and imagine himself, he probably has a really good mental control to arise out of nothing, ability to visualize. So the visualization of being outside of himself, looking back at himself, that would be the initial exercise of creation of other. He would say, I am, and then he would go look back. He would go out and say, I am that, and look out back at himself and say, I am. So I am that I am, and he's looking back at himself. I am that I am. And so both sides are doing the same thing. He's creating I am that I am, but he's also creating it of himself and identifying himself. So the Father and Son creation is what's happened here, of course. And that would be the origin of existence, of otherness, of relationship, of doing something other than being alone. And so, but it was only himself. But again, we've stipulated here that God's mind is very strong. And I think strong would probably be a way of categorizing what strong means, is that it's able to maintain and hold things in place. So having a thought, he was able to hold love in place, never let it go. He was able to hold the thought of the Son in place and never let it go. And at that point, he says, okay, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And all things that were created by him. The Word created by him. So we then get the hint that the Son was then in charge of creating everything else. So we've got the Son, who is actually the Father, but is basically separated himself from the Father. He's continuing to visualize himself, but allowing himself to be other than that. So he's looking at the Son as at a distance, even though he actually is himself. And he gives the Son the ability, the task of creating everything else. Now the question would be, why would he do that? Why not just create a whole bunch of other particles? And I think the reason why is because God knew, the Father, the One, I believe the Father knew that if he did that, he would have to then allow all the other possibilities of relationship, of how these other particles interacted with each other. He would know that some of the way that those particles interacted with each other were ways that he didn't consider love. And so it violated his prime directive. Everything in his conscious universe, anything that he created, everything that was from him, was only love. There's no shadow of turning. Absolutely dependable that God is love and nothing else, and it will never change. And so the Father then gave the Son the authorization to create everything else, so that he would be, the Father would be separated by at least a degree, and he wouldn't be required to be the administrator of it. I don't think that I don't think that God is blind to that which is evil. I just don't think he wants to have any part of it. I think he wants to be separate from it, because he has chosen to be only love. He did not choose to be love and hate. He chose to be love. And so he gave the Son that directive, create the whole creation. The Son then said, I'll do it. You can count on me. I will create all of the particles of the creation out of consciousness the same way that you created me. I'll do the same visualization of points. And I will never stop visualizing them into existence. I won't just go, too much trouble to think about that today. I've had it. I'm just going to give up, and we're going to roll up the windows, the window shade. It's just, let it go. I think that that Jesus, the Son that he created, that was him, was completely faithful to maintain it, and hence he became the chief cornerstone. So the whole creation is built on the chief cornerstone of the Son. And his Father said, this is my Son whom I'm well pleased. So he did it all the way through. He followed it all the way to being incarnated into it. So the sun did in creating each of these points, it basically, rather than saying, I am that I am, and saying, making himself each of those points fully himself, although he may have, he could have said, that is, that is, that is, that is, that is, that is. And he could have made each of the points that arose out of his declaration. And he could then be a point of source, and the other points can be a point of creation, and then just simply follow the rules of relationship, which he then embedded in each of them. And they didn't have his full character. They just had what he gave them. So in this creation scenario that we're painting, in this, we're at a first level, Father, second level, Son, third level, conscious points. He gave them, he said, I'm going to create X number of EM plus or minus conscious points, and X number plus or minus quark conscious points. There's going to be more plus conscious points, more quark pluses, and more minus electron types. I use electron conscious point and electromagnetic conscious point synonymously. So we've got electron conscious points, quark conscious points, got more electron conscious points than more minuses than pluses on the electron conscious points, more pluses than minuses on quark conscious points. So they gather stuff around them, create the quarks and dipole particles, create the quarks, dipole particles create the electrons. But there was 4 different types that he created, as I just said. Those 4 types are not the things that he said, that is, that is, that is, that is, that is. He basically just created a generic conscious point. He just created a gazillion of them. I mean, there's a number beyond numbers. It's the whole universe. It is a finite number, I think, but it's very large. We don't know what it is.
Uncountable.
It's uncountable. It might be countable, but take a very long time. And so we've got all these conscious points, but with the conscious points by themselves, without having character on them, they will not be able to function. They'll be just like, okay, we're out here, look at this. There's all these other guys hanging around me. What do we do now? So they had to have rules. And he gave the rule set. He gave a certain number to the plus electron conscious points, certain number the plus conscious electron conscious points, certain number to the plus quarks, certain number to the minus quark conscious points. So there's a character envelope. And this envelope is like the things that a conscious point will do. To my mind, I think the character that they have a plus and minus. That they said, I'm a plus. Another one says, I'm a minus. But that envelope only had one of them. It was either a plus or it was a minus. It wasn't both of them. It was a plus or it's a minus. A different kind of particle, if the envelope had a minus on it. So the plus quark conscious point, the minus electron conscious point, and had a negative type character to it. It said, I am a negative. And then it said, what else am I? Well, I'm an electron type. Okay, I could have, the quark thing is just exactly a conscious point too, but it just puts on a different character cloak. And so it says, I'm an electron, I'm a minus, I'm a electron type. In physics, they use the word lepton, which means light particle. It's a bit confusing because we'll see that neutrinos are also leptons, but they're not. Um, they're a combination particle. It's just a little. I just call them electromagnetic conscious points or electron conscious points, just for simplicity, rather than using the name lepton and hadron, which is what they would use in physics. So we got the minus. We've got it's an electron type, an electromagnetic type, and it has a spin, which basically means it has an orientation. Now, if you've got orientation, that immediately bells go off and you say, wait a second, if we don't have anything to have reference to, the idea of having a direction, having a point means nothing. It does, you might as well, it's meaningless. And so what we have to have then is we have to have one other type of conscious point, which is the grid point. Which is basically, again, the Son, Christ, Jesus, who became Jesus. We have a three-dimensional grid, plus, minus, five, and up, down, right, left, front, back. And it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're all next to each other. And all the spots on that are places that it can sit. So it fills up the whole universe with grid points. So now it's got places for all the conscious points to sit. At that point, we have an electron. We've defined the cloak that the conscious point put on that was giving it the consciousness. It had consciousness. It was aware of the Son, if nothing else. But I'm saying it's also aware of the other conscious points, which is kind of a trick, because consciousness looking at consciousness is kind of weird. But in a way, it's kind of the same thing as saying I can see the Son who is only conscious. So my vision of how this works is that it's not like the electron conscious point looks over here at a positron conscious point and it can see it. It doesn't. It actually, the thing that it is aware of the Son. It's aware of the Word. And the Word is aware of the conscious point, the positive conscious point. And so anytime it sees this other one, it's actually going through the nexus, the center point, the control panel of the Son.
Like the queen bee, sort of, or the mothership of of everything is referring back to that one area in relation to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, they don't see each other. That's the way I've seen it, easiest to see it, or to make it a construction that is logical. It's like, okay, this is something we can build. We can build it. It's a simple build. We just make a route to it, and we can address it. And we can say, we're looking at all the things in the I'm at this particular grid point number, and I want to see all the things in the local area. One of my postulates is that it only looks in the local area. And so it said, I'm at this point, and so there would be a sphere around that, and it would then go, back to the mothership, back to the Word, back to Christ, and then it would say, okay, give me the state of all of those ones. And so actually all that's necessary is that rather than each of these things communicating with all these points to be able to know how to move, you got a plus here, minus here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you add them all together, rather than having them all do this kind of really complex calculation, at least it's a lot of numbers to add, it could simply just go in and say, I'm here, and it just reads the local state of all those and calculates and comes back and says, I'm okay, this is where I'm at. These are all the things around me. This is how I move in relationship to all the other points around me. So that's just a way of doing quick calculations. And so it would be, all that would be necessary in terms of like a computer type of implementation is that you just move data into a register. Here's my register. I need to fill it up with all the local data. Okay, we just move all those in. We move the register, the data that's all been fed into that central space. Move all of that data into the corresponding place where the sun is, and we just look and fill in all those answers, and then add them together, and then we know our answer of how where to move, and every one of them does. So all of them just need to load their local addresses, your local register. We're filling up the registers with the local data. So again, this is just for computational speed, efficiency. And so my point was, we started out with this conscious point. The point had a character to it, which was an envelope. The envelope had spin, it had type, and it had charge to it. There might be some other ones. We just add those if we think that we need some other ones. If we start looking at quantum mechanics, they come up with a fair number of different quantum numbers, quantum type of things that need to be kept track of. I think those three are actually where all those others come from. Might be wrong. If we come up with ones, we need to modify that. I'm just noting that those are at least those three need to be there. So the reason for going through that whole thing was just to note that there's an envelope of character. It's a character type envelope that's going to also be able to do some function too. It's able to kind of look at its local sphere and look at all of the particles and their charges and their spin and their types that are all around it. It's going to be able to add them together and figure out what the sum of them is in terms of which way it should move based on, got a bunch of negatives here, a bunch of positives here. Okay, I'm positive, I need to go this way. That type of thing. It needs to calculate what it's going to do, given that it's got all this stuff surrounding it. Then we have so that concept of having an envelope that has one capability, has identity, it has character to it. This is what I will call the proto group entity. It's like there's not really a group here. You've only got one point of consciousness. So to call it a group entity is a little bit premature. So that's why I call it a proto group entity. So it's what you get just before you got a group entity.
Right. whatever is pre-actual entity.
Yeah, so we haven't got to an actual group entity, which is the thing I'm going toward. We're starting with, okay, this is kind of the seed from where the group entity concept came from. And so we've got this sheath, which is the group entity for the conscious point. Then the next thing that we do, we now have, we're going to form an electron. Again, we have a naked electron conscious point. Nothing but consciousness and its group entity around it, its proto group entity around it. And it says, I don't have anybody to bond with. I don't have a positron conscious point to bond with. All of you dipole particles, you're all completely bonded. You got electron conscious point, positron conscious point. And you're completely bound together. So you're in the space is filled up with these plus and minus EMCPs. And those things, we've got this fly in the ointment now. We've got this extra electron conscious point that is it's putting out signals and says, I'm negative, I'm unbonded, I want to bond with every plus in creation. And so it sends out its signal to its local sphere, and they all go, whoa, we've got a live one here. And they all, in the next moment, they all point inward on that conscious point that's sitting at the center of it. And those what they did, they were dipole particles. Dipole particles have a plus and a minus to them, a minus electron conscious point and a positron conscious point. And those two, when they don't have any force on them, probably either land right on top of each other or the grid points next to each other, and I don't know which. So we've got those two things on top of each other, and then it now sees the naked electron conscious point, and it says, okay, you're negative, and I've got a plus and minus here. I'm going to move my plus closer to the minus of the naked electron conscious point, and I'm going to move the plus I'm going to move the minus farther away because the minus repels a minus, and that's because each of those things are conscious points with a sheath on them. They have proto-group consciousness around each of them, so they know how to act. They're bonded to each other, but when somebody else comes into the picture, they know how to respond to them too. And so what they do is they move, the plus moves to the minus moves away from the minus, and so you've got a stretched electron conscious point. So at that point, and given that space is filled with these things, these electron conscious points, all of space is going to be, well, not all of space. There's a group around this that's going to be orienting like that, and this is where we start to get into the constants of physics. There is something that's got to limit this thing. Otherwise, this thing is going to, keep attracting. It's going to be the eggplant that ate Chicago. I mean, it's going to just take over everything. So we've got to,
Okay, so we have to hold it back in some way, or the rest of the other particles have to hold it back somehow, or
it's going to get getting heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier. It's like, why wouldn't this thing just, crystallize the entire universe and polarize the whole thing? Why didn't it just? Why does it stop? Why does it stop? Why does it? We know an electron only weighs 0.511 million electron volts. We know that's the amount of mass energy that it has. So we know that something is not complete here. We have to have something that causes it to stop at 0.511, and it always stops that. It's not ever something else. It's always that.
Hmm. So
and
so it doesn't. That's the smallest it can be, or that's where we measure it. But something is telling it what to do, and that's we're getting into constants there.
Yes, and this is where we get the Bohr magneton. This is the amount of momentum associated with an electron. This is the amount of spin that's associated with spin. Now, we have not talked about spin at all to this point. So spin is the thing that, like I said, it's this conscious point with a group entity, proto-group entity around it. It's a little envelope that says that it has spin, and it's a particular direction, and it's in a particular direction with respect to the grid points. Okay, so it's got its own little direction, and it's there right now. It can change, but right now it's got a particular angle. Wherever it's angled, it's got 300. It's got a sphere. It's a solid angle, solid spherical angle that it can choose. So the amount of this, whenever we had all of these electron conscious point dipole, these electron dipole type things that were filling space, they all kind of attracted to it. When that happened, they also were interacting with the field, with the command associated with the spin of the electron.
Mm-hmm.
So if the electron, this naked conscious point, this naked electron conscious point, it's calling the shots. Everybody else in its environment, they're all confused. They're just kind of pointing every which way, they're bonded together, they're neutralized, they're neutered. They can't mate with anybody. They are completely already, they're hitched. And so when we've got this single electron, naked electron conscious point there, it has a spin that is orienting it, and so it's going to then put out the signal to all the electrons, all the dipole, all the conscious points in its vicinity. There are plus and minuses, of course. There's also quark pluses and minuses in the C. We're just ignoring those for right now. They'll behave the same way, but they behave a little different because they've got a strong force, but so they mainly interact with other quarks, but they do have an electrical type of aspect to them, so they will actually be there. So having said that, we just have a spin there, and then this question is what kind of response does the spin orientation of all of these dipole particles that are located all around space inside that inside its sphere of influence? Okay, and the answer is, if it's pointed this way, it's going to expect that everything that is that it is around it will point in the same direction as it's pointing. And so the sum of this plus of that at this point right there will have a vector that will add up, but there's a vector that's going to go over. If you're over a little bit, it'll be an up and an over. And so there's going to be a bending of the spin. You've seen the way that you've seen magnets with iron filings on them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes kind of like a lobe.
Yeah.
It's two, loops. That's what we've got here. We've got loops. We've got, instead of iron filings, what we have is dipole particles. And the dipole particles both have a spin. The plus end of it and the minus end of the dipole particle both have a spin. And those spins are actually going to have to be interrelated, because one's going to go down and the other's going to go up. And so they actually have to form a complete loop also. And so it's going to point up, and this is going to point in, and this is going to point out, and this is going to point in. And so they will be biting their own tail. Each of the conscious points, they're neutralized. They're kind of like stuck on each other. They're plus and minus neutralized, and they're spin neutralized. They created their own little kind of
circuit of some sort, or like a circuit of some sort.
Yeah, it's kind of like a circuit. It's a magnetic circuit. Yeah, it's a funny kind of circuit. It's kind of, but the answer is yes, it is. It is a circuit. It's kind of where circuits come from. This is kind of why circuits work, is because of this. So actually, yeah. So anyway, you've got these dipole particles. Now, as I noted, they're kind of already kind of neutralized. And so for them to actually have any effect on this, there's this naked conscious point, which is kind of sitting there with its, exposed spin, its exposed magnetic field. It is pointing up, and it's sending out a signal that says, point up, and down here it's saying point down. Anyway, it's sending out this signal of what each of these things should be doing that's around it. And when it does that, the dipole particle, when it receives that signal, let's say it's the top of the conscious point, and it says point up. And the conscious points, the dipole particles that are in that space then have to have a net spin direction that is in the direction that particular spin location demands. So we're having this, it's going to be a different direction at every point in the entire circle. And that direction is going to be mediated, it's going to be held, it's going to actually have a something there based on how the spin of this conscious point is oriented in relationship to where it is compared to where the dipole particle is. So again, it's sitting in a grid point. It's got a particular orientation. It has at every point around it, it has a particular direction that the spin must be for that. That's actually the command. That's what this relationship between conscious points on this physical kind of force level actually is informing them. This is where I am. This is where I expect you to be. And so it's checking and saying, oh, it expects me to be that way. Okay, I'll move that way. And so that is what it's doing, is it's moving, it's orienting all of the dipole particles with their spins by causing them to twist. Instead of them being up, down, they're going to be twisted a little bit. So there's a net spin. I don't know how to actually visualize it with my fingers, but in any case, there's a net spin direction. When you add together the two of them, they don't cancel out exactly. You've got them off, they're askew a bit. And the result is they now, when they're in that position, they are askew that exact amount to be oriented that exact amount for that particular naked conscious point so that it fits in its particular space and orients properly according to that requirement. So what we've got is we've got a total number of dipole particles which are going to be involved in creating the total amount of spin that is equal to the amount of spin that the naked conscious point had. So so just to give a contra example, if this was pointing up at 1 and this is pointing over at 3, it simply doesn't fit in that space. It's going to collapse because there's nothing holding it at a 3 spin. I don't know if you can get a 3 spin, but in any case, say it's something big, and it's bigger than it should be. And so maybe it's 0.5 and it should be 0.4. So it's at the wrong amount. And so it will only allow a total amount of spin that is exactly equal to the amount of spin that the electron has. The electron, naked conscious point, only has a given set physically measurable amount of spin. And that amount of spin, when you finally kind of like actually look at it as a mass and consider it as angular momentum, it's the Bohr magneton it's the magnetic moment, so it's not exactly in the right units, but we kind of get the idea. That's kind of where it's based on. It's based on this amount of spin. And so the magnetic moment, I think magnetic moment has to do with, like it's when you push on it, it pushes back with a certain amount of force. It's something like that. I have to examine that a little bit more. But the idea is that there's only so much force that this magnetic thing can have. It's not going to do more, it's not going to do less. This is what it is, and it's going to be creating that amount of force in response to the spin. And so my point was, and the reason I mentioned a physical constants, was this amount of spin that you get, this turns out to be almost the most fundamental unit of mass or nature, or everything is measured in terms of spin. And it's like, well, why is spin? That's the question I asked all the way through physics was, why this amount of, why is spin such a big deal? Where did this come from? What is even the spin? And the spin in this particular case is actually, it's the orientation of the angular moment of the magnetic field, or the orientation of the dipole particles around the electron, and that's amount of orientation. And you can get really carried away here in terms of like going into the various aspects of quantum mechanics and different units of it, like the Planck's constant, which is the joule second, is the unit, which is the energy times time. And so it's basically, there's energy, which is the amount of organization, and the reason that's why I brought this up is this order of the points, the angles of the dipole particles, the amount of order associated with their organization, that corresponds to a certain amount of energy. And so we've got this organization that is associated with the spin. And that amount of energy is the same unit. The joule second is the same unit as angular momentum. And so to call it spin, it's kind of makes sense. And it's, it's like, really, how'd that happen? That's amazing. That this thing that, is on this micro level is actually spin, and it's actually energy, it's order. And the fact that it kind of like is this over an amount of time, I believe it's like joule second. So it's like, what length of time do you have, is there an amount of energy? And so we've got these organized dipole particles, and the unit of time, I believe, the universal unit of time is the moment. And that comes about because every conscious point looks at its sphere, determines where it should move, and then it moves. And it looks at its sphere, calculates where it should be, and then it moves. And so this sequence of look, calculate, move, that is a moment. So that's the fundamental unit of time. It happens throughout the universe all at once. It's simultaneous. It's organized by God. There's an absolute time, and we have absolute space. So we've got this grid points, which is absolute space. We've got these conscious point. We've got this sequence of 1 going to 2 going to 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, little moment segments. That's the sequence of time as everything processes. So, does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I think I'm tracking with you.
Okay.
So at this point we have interactions over time simultaneously in an organized manner, measured by joule seconds. But there was something that I didn't quite get before. So with this kind of grid, this like framework of how we're assembling things, um, everything is still going back to every conscious point is still connected to the original form of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of interacting together. All the particles are interacting together, but are they getting permission from the source, or they're kind of now interacting with each other and interweaving, like bouncing off each other, getting energy from each other, and
Mm-hmm.
so on. I'm having trouble kind of visualizing that, or under.
Okay, that's a good question. That's a very important point. The answer is it could be either. It'll get the same result either way. I always try and go parsimonious, in other words, thrifty. As few instructions as you have to do, is least amount of communication. And so if you give local control to everybody and just let them do it and follow the rules that are on board, you don't have a central processor that's handling everything. You're basically saying, okay, we created you all as conscious points. We filled up the universe with them. Some of them bound and made dipole particles. Some of them are separated, and some become electrons. Some become quarks. They are the ones that create, atoms, which are only matter. It's not antimatter atoms. There are, but there's a different reason for that. It's not like there's an equal number of matter and antimatter atoms. It's just that there's some tricks we can do, and we'll go over that. But it's an unusual thing to get an antimatter atom, whereas it's common to have matter atoms. And that's because God made more of the electron conscious points and more of the plus quark conscious points. So the answer to your question just directly is, I think it would be simpler to have each of the conscious points in charge of doing all of the calculations, doing all of the moving, and the only thing they're looking for is the timing signal. And the only thing the central processor did, the word Christ, the only thing he had to do to keep this thing going was say, now, 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 now. And of course, when you've got something that's repetitive in computer type of programming, what you do is you set something like up as a bot, and you just let that be in charge of the timekeeper. So you create you delegate some authority and say, you're in charge, and it'd be another conscious point. You're in charge of time. You keep the time pulse. And the same way with all of the grid points. All of the grid points are saying, well, I'm here, and I'm going to always be updating who is on my spot right now. And I think it's probably only one conscious point per spot. And per grid point. And so each of them is basically saying, I've got, this particular grid point, I've got this particular conscious point on my grid point. This is who I am and where I am and who's on me. And it then just fills the register up and says, that's the location. If you need to do any computations based on where I am, who's on me, here's my data, I fill it in. And so, you don't have to do a lot of calculations to figure out who's where, and everybody has to read everything over and over and over again. You just have the grid point informing, this is where I am.
That's okay, I think I'm getting it. It's so it's almost like the measure of time, or the central consciousness, or the root consciousness is sort of a timekeeper, and everything else is operating further and further out to that time and informing the central sort of nervous system about what's happening, or on the beat following commands of creation and of passing on information one to another.
Yeah, pretty much. You have a timekeeper that says, now's the time to do the sequence. Observe. Now calculate. Now move. And so the timekeeper, I don't know if it sends out 3 and says, okay, now it's time to move, now it's time to calculate, now it's time to look, now it's time to calculate, now it's time to move. Okay, now it's time to look again, now it's time to calculate, now it's time to move. It might send out 3. It might be keeps everybody on cue that way. And all of them, I mean, and each of them has a very simple job to do. The grid points just have to report who's on first, and and all of the grid points, all of the internal to the each of the particles, they just have to look and see what's the data locally. And they then they do a calculation locally, and then they do the movement locally. And so I think it's a distributed processing. It's massively parallel processed. It's kind of like the ultimate massive parallel processing.
Hmm.
But the thing that we were actually trying to get to with all of this was how to get to the conscious point having an atom having a character which was made up of these smaller ones, or how did the electron actually have a character, given that it had all of these proto consciousnesses in them. So the way that I have organized it is, and postulated it, is that each of these proto-consciousnesses, when they have formed a quantum that is associated with a particular type of particle, in other words, there has to be a specification of the amount of energy, the amount of organization associated with an electron. The electron amount, the amount of energy that's associated was the amount of pulling apart and the amount of spin. So we had there's going to be organization on both of those levels, pulling apart, minus going or plus going to the minus being pushed apart. That's one type of organization. The organization of the spin being a certain way, that's going to be a second type of organization. And those two amounts of organization together are going to add up to 0.51 million electron volts of organization when we finally get to the level of being able to do colliders and cloud chambers and different types of detectors that determine velocities and directions and can determine mass. Whenever we get to that point, we'll say, oh, the amount of order that was there was 0.51 a million electron volts, and that's going to be the amount that we see on the physical level. But if you're familiar with physics and the way that they've what's considered to be elementary particles, you'll notice that electrons under what is an electron made up of, they put it in the category of elementary. In other words, they say there's nothing smaller than this. So this entire discussion that we've had about having electrons being made of dipole particles in a naked electron conscious point, all of that is not recognized by conventional physics. This is entirely my postulate of how the universe is organized on it would be called, if you want a name for it, this would be on the sub-quantum level. It's below the level of a quantum. And the quantum in this particular case is the amount of energy that is being carried by an electron. And the amount of spin that it has is going to be, I think it's 1/2 of h bar, but I might be wrong on that. There's an amount of spin that each quantum will have, and things have there's two different ways that they categorize this, either as odd even or half and integer. So integers and half integers. So they can have one half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, or you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's so either one of them is it's acceptable. You just have to know which system you're working on, and don't have the details of that down to tell you the details of the mathematics or the constants associated with that. But it has to do with Planck's constant, and there's a 2 pi in there. It's probably h bar over 2, but that might be wrong. In any case, it's there's this half of Planck's constant, some type of portion of it's proportional to half of Planck's constant. And that amount right there is called any particle that has a spin of 1/2 of Planck's constant is considered to be what's called a fermion, after Enrico Fermi. I don't know if he discovered this or they just named it in honor of him, but in any case, it's after Enrico Fermi, and he was a giant in the field of research, very respected. And they named there's the particles, things like electrons, quarks. Those are and all of the other particles that they have created in the standard model that are have half integer are called fermions. The ones that typically have mass, although it isn't completely true. The Z and the W, I think, they're called bosons, which means they have they're integers, or multiple even number multiples of h bar over 2 or something like that. And so those are ones that are typically things like photon. A photon is considered to have a So we've got the two types of particles, the fermions and the bosons. The bosons are named after it's an Indian name, first name, and last name is Bose, B-O-S-E, and so they named it after him. And he probably had something to do with finding them, but he worked with Einstein a lot. Anyway, those are two really important concepts: the fermion aspect of it, the boson type aspect of it. But all that's to say that whenever you add together all of these conscious points and the dipole particles and polarization and spin, and either it's even or odd, you end up with a particle that has a character. That was the point I was getting to. All those were just saying that there's different types of things that add up and make it be what it is. And in the case of an electron, it's a fermion. It's a half integer spin, and that thing to be in this panpsychism kind of world, which is what we're trying to understand, to be a panpsychic kind of entity, we would have to have unified. I don't know how many conscious points are involved with all the dipole particles that are polarized and spin and electromagnetically polarized. I don't know how many are involved there, but it's a lot. I would say, I don't know if it's billions or trillions. It's whatever it is. It's lots. And those are the things, those that carry the order for the electron, and it's going to be related to the amount of spin and the amount of pole that it has. So it'll always have this amount of spin, and it'll always have this amount of pole, and it'll always have that amount, total amount of polarization and magnetic and electrical polarization. And that is going to be the thing that is going to be carried by the group entity, which is the electron group entity. So what I'm postulating here, this is a new thing. We have not talked about this at this point. Before we were talking about proto group entities. Now we're talking about group entity. The group entity in this case is it's a consciousness which arises as a result of all of these conscious points being enrolled to be part of a quantum. The quantum will have exactly this amount of energy and exactly this amount of spin. And those are the foundations of what we are going to conserve. We're not going to ever gain them. We're not going to lose them. They're going to be held as entities that exist forever. And so to be able to have that kind of extreme, what we call it, validity certification, that is going to have to be it's going to have to be checked by something. Something is going to have to be in charge of that. Otherwise, it's going to have to be done locally. And what we're saying is that it's not done locally. That's my postulate. It might be done locally. I don't think so. I think that it's actually each of these things are doing their job, and when it gets to the level of being a quantum, at that point we form. It's ad hoc. It just comes out. It becomes a group entity at the time whenever we have the appropriate amount of spin orientation and the appropriate amount of polarization, stretching. When we have that in place, that amount will be held somewhere in the universe. So if we get rid of that electron and convert that into another form of organization of the dipole C, the amount of organization associated with that thing that happened as a result of getting rid of it will have exactly the same amount of organization as what started. And I note, to do this in particular, we have a positron, which has a positive conscious point, electron conscious point, and a negative electron conscious point surrounded by dipole particles, and they both have mass. They both have 0.511 million electron volts. They will then run into each other, and when that happens, they will then put out two gamma rays, each of 0.511 million electron volts, and there will be no loss of either spin or polarization. So the dipole C will then have a certain amount of magnetic polarization, a certain amount of electrical polarization, electrical being pulling apart of the dipole particles, magnetic polarization, the spin of the dipole particles. So these things are at right angles, and the total wavelength of the thing along that, however long, whether it looks like a spike or whether it looks like a nice sine wave, whether it looks like a Gaussian curve, like a temperature thermometer type thing, whatever it looks like, and I don't know how it looks like, whatever it is, it's going to have the total amount of polarization and spin added together. That amount will be held in that dipole particle. I'm not in that dipole particle, held in that photon. The photon is going to be the unit of energy that will now be carrying this quanta of what was previously a single quanta. It was still it was electron before, and it had, plus and minus. It had just the minus and all the dipole particles around it. When you brought in a naked plus electron conscious point, you had a naked minus electron conscious point. When you hit those two together, you've just got a dipole particle. You don't have anything. You don't have any naked plus and minuses. You just got a dipole particle. So you disappeared the thing around which your electron and your positron were forming. Your seed got annihilated.
Yeah, it's just completely disrupted it and changed form.
Exactly. Yeah, it completely turned from mass into energy. And energy is actually a really poor term to use because it's too generic. It turned into a photon. It turned into some polarized space. The space turned into electrical polarization and magnetic polarization. And it's going this way, and the other one, and it put out another one going 0.511 million electron volts going that way. So they were going this way. So you got one going this way and one going that way. And each of them are 0.511, and there isn't any naked electron conscious point in that. You just have photons. You just have even number spin, and you don't have any net charge, a net naked conscious point around which to congeal a volume that has a net half unit of spin. You've got, because the thing disappeared, it turned into a conscious point. It turned into a dipole particle. It's no longer in play. You've only got this organization. You had electron organization. Now you've got two photon organization. So you got organization. You got two organized masses. Now you got two organized photons.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them have the same amount of electrical stretch and magnetic stretch.
Real quick, why don't you move your mic back over just a little bit? It sounds I can still hear you, but it's
that wasn't just a little far away. That's across the room.
That's why I had that room sound. I can still hear you.
You can stop me right away when I do that.
I didn't realize until just a second ago. I will.
Okay, it's a little bit hollow here.
We're back.
Okay, so anyway, the point I was trying to make was we had a conscious point, which was, I'm sorry, we had a mass which was in a quantum as a group entity, as a quantum group entity. And the quantum group entity had this amount of energy associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever the two combined, the group entity then formed a new group entity, which was, the whole thing, and then it split apart. Now, this brings up a lot of questions about, what actually, how much was directed and how much was, by a group entity. What's the need? Really, the question is, are we multiplying entities excessively here, violating Occam's razor? Did we add something here that's not useful, that's not actually needed? And we'll see in a moment when we talk about the electron going through two slits. When we had that, we actually did need to have the group entity because we needed to have, this thing that's separated apart, and then it came back together and it collapsed all in one point. And there's no real particular good reason why this thing would have all collapsed on a single point unless there was like a mandate that the quantum actually is never broken up into, I guess, indiscriminately. It's broken. You start with an electron conscious. You start with an electron. It's made up of all of these dipole particles. It's basically a ripple in the dipole sea. It's basically a sea, and it's rippling through it, and it runs into these two slits. And when it does that, two waves come out from it, and the two waves that come out from that then ripple along, and when they eventually hit the screen, they collapse, and on a single spot. They don't collapse a little here and a little there and over there and make a wave kind of pattern. They don't. They make a single spot. So an electron comes in and it makes a single spot on the screen. But that screen was the entirety of the electrons cohort of energy, its amount of polarization and spin that it had.
So it's like even when it separates or when all the particles that should exist all in one place somehow split up, they regroup as though it's like DNA, it's as though it replicates itself or it knows what to do or where to go.
It has some sort of a coherence to it. It isn't just kind of like that we've got this, like you look at a sea wave, you don't say that wave there out there in the sea, that wave is communicating with itself. And if it is going to make sure that it transmits its entire amount of energy on the beach at a certain spot, it's going to, it's got to maintain its energy cohort at exactly, and it will collapse at one particular spot. It doesn't do that. It's just it's a different model. It's a much more complex model than what we're dealing with now. This is very elemental. This only happens at very small levels, and it's because you end up having all of these different kind of conscious points adding together, and at some point they start to smear together and you don't see the effect. It's just simply invisible. It's not that it isn't there, it just averages out and it becomes more like measuring temperature versus measuring the kinetic energy of a single molecule of gas. So it's an average kind of thing as opposed to a single thing. But this is not an accepted physics concept that I've just spoken here about the conscious point being the cohort of dipole particles and naked conscious point that is going through two slits. It's got enough volume to it. It's enough space associated with the amount of area that it's influencing that it actually can go through some of each of it, can go through some of both sides. And given that that's organized like that, whenever it gets through, it makes, little, like wave-like type of emanations from each of the slits, and the wave-like emanations are related to the concentrations of the amount of polarization and spin that those little things have. So it'd be like, this little line right here had the same amount of polarization, and this had the same amount of polarization, and they cross over each other. And when they cross over and superimpose and they land on a certain spot, that certain spot is sufficiently concentrated that it just all lands right at that spot. And that's what you see in a conventional wave. If you were using actual water waves and using two slits with two water waves, you would see lumps and troughs and valleys, troughs and hills, all the way across this backboard that you're looking at. Or if you were to actually just to draw a line, imaginary line in the sand and say, okay, here's a high, here's a low, here's a high, low, high, low, high, low, high, low. And that's what you would see. But that actually isn't the way a single electron will produce the pattern of an interference pattern if you throw enough electrons at it. One at a time, eventually they will, have enough of them that, land here and enough of them that don't land here, enough of them that do land here and don't land there, that it creates a yes, no, black, white, black, white, black, white, black, white interference pattern on the screen. And it creates it over time rather than it all being there because you had a whole bunch happening all at once. And so that particular idea of having everything just all collapse at once, that's my reason why I came up with the idea of the group entity and the idea of if that in fact is happening, then the same thing is actually happening whenever you have just an electron by itself. The electron by itself has a group entity there. It's not doing anything, it's not running into anything until it actually interacts. And when it interacts, the group entity associated with electron, like group entity associated with positron, those two are going to interact, and they're going to form an agreement. They're going to negotiate. They're going to look at the rules. They're going to decide based on probably each of the conscious points that's inside of it, where each one of them would like to go, and what their next move is, and they will then create the photon that goes both ways. And it isn't obvious in that situation that there's a group entity. It's just because you can just say, well, that works out just fine because you've just got two particles that annihilated, and all that's left is mass, and all that's left is energy, all that's left is two photons, and so those go away, and you don't really need it. It's nice to put that on top of it. You can say we started with a group entity that had 5.511 million electron volts on both sides. Those were masses, and then we got two photons that are both 0.511 million electron volts, and both of those are going opposite directions now. Everything is fine, but it's you could rightfully say, well, you just made up this extra group entity. You multiplied, you multiplied entities. You made it more complex than it needed to be. That's a foul. You shouldn't do that. There's no point in doing this, and you would be correct. It would probably work just fine without doing the group entity concept in that case. But when you get something that's a little bit more complex and you go, it's really hard to actually understand how this thing actually turned into a photon, where it landed only in one spot and created a interference pattern, and without having the group entity thing. When you put the group entity thing into that situation, and you see that, we actually collapse everything in one spot based on some criteria, possibly the one that had the highest amount of concentration for that particular electron going through. So sometimes it comes over here, sometimes it's over there, sometimes it's here, but it ends up being distributed in a certain way, and it actually looks like an interference pattern. It looks like it was a wave the whole time, or a particle the whole time. No, it looks like it was a wave that was doing this. And so we say, we got something there that makes it look like it's a wave, and it resolves the issue of the wave particle duality, is what it does. And that's a big deal. Not being able to resolve that and just be able to say, we don't have to talk about complementarity anymore. We just talk about, we've got a particle, and it's always made up of dipole particles and a naked conscious point, or multiple naked conscious points, and multiple types of dipole particles. And those things, they can interact as a group entity, and they can interfere. They can interact as a photoelectric effect, where you've got a photon, this huge photon coming along, and it all interacts on one single electron orbital that was, like we talked about before, 2,860 times smaller than the size of the photon that came in on it. It's like, okay, that's it's a useful concept. By itself, does that prove it? Not really, but it's like, well, it fits at least. At least it goes, kind of some of the it would be, what are the rules associated with a group entity? And that one of the rules would be, whenever they come together, they whenever it interacts, all of the energy associated with all of the dipole spin, all the dipole separation and spin orientation, the magnetic and electrical orientation of it, all of it is concentrated on the point where it landed, and it gives that amount of energy to that electron orbital, and it raises it out this very, very tiny small amount from a wave that was literally thousands of times larger than the place where it interacted. So that's an example of creating a single mind from a multiplicity of consciousnesses. And so that was what we're trying to do here with this arguing about panpsychism, is we're trying to argue that we actually do have a solution to the combination problem of panpsychism. And it's a very severe problem. It's a very significant, very substantial problem. It's a deal killer. If you can't do that, you really don't have a theory. And I believe that we do have an explanation that's reasonable with this. We don't have all of the, what do we call it, all the rules. How does it actually do the negotiation? How does it actually think? Who's in charge? What's actually happening inside? The answer, I think we'll have to say we don't know. I think philosophers and scientists will go through this concept when this becomes well accepted. They'll go through and they'll say, what actually is the simplest way of, devising a rule set of how this combination of the electron and the positron, and they interact with each other, the electron interacting with all of the many atoms that it had to go by to get through the two slits, and how does it then negotiate to decide which atom that it actually wants to get absorbed by and raise the electron's activation energy, the orbital electron activation energy. So the answer is I haven't tried to do all of that. I think it's the kind of thing that will require a lot of very detailed analysis and to try and minimize the number of rules, minimize the complexity, making this as simple as possible, a consciousness that is as simple as possible, but nevertheless does exist. The most important thing here is the issue of what happens when they get together. Do they then just kind of like dissolve into one? Do they immediately say, hey, we're just going to just be one? Or do they say, okay, we're two, but we're going to negotiate with each other, and we're going to eventually, become one? Or, what is the method of actually deciding that? And I don't know, but I think the idea is sufficient to say that there is a consciousness that is in charge of the fullness of it, that keeps track of the total amount of spin and polarization associated with each of the particles, and that in turn, is at the very least negotiated between various parts, and then becomes it becomes ultimately a single group entity when it does collapse. And at that point, you've got a full collapse. And it's got, when you've activated the electron orbital, you've increased that. So was that adequately tight in terms of its description to be satisfying?
Yeah, I think that it makes sense within the question, that we pose of how connected is all of these pieces, or if it's connected, if it's more than just one thing, and then dropping a series of chaotic interactions. It seems like you went into how it can still exist within the singular consciousness kind of framework that we're talking about. I'm gonna have to wrap my head around it more. Once we can listen back to the recording and everything. Because as we're going, I'm slowly building my own framework and everything, but it's not all coming at once. But
I think the thing that we're trying to work toward is being able to say that each of the entities that goes beyond that, the atom, the molecule, and if we go, and the molecule is basically, it turns into a crystal, which is just a big molecule. to make kind of like earth and organic kind of inorganic kind of things. And if we go through the organic method, we've gone adding all of these molecules, organic, very complex molecules, have DNA, we've got ribosomes and Golgi apparatus, etc. All of those cell body or the cell membrane, all of those things, creating that together and having that be a totality of a consciousness versus being just independent entities. And I think just kind of initially, we can say that the amount of centralization of the consciousness for a cell is probably going to be kind of small. You know, probably each of the components in it probably works pretty well as its own local direction. But having said that, you know, whenever you kind of start adding one cell to another cell, and the two then start coordinating with each other, and each of them has their own kind of nature to them and kind of their own consciousness, their own group entity associated with that cell. It's got a little bit of a relationship type of a feel to it. But again, two cells together isn't like a huge amount of coordination. You can kind of, have an interface between the two of them. You have bonding possibly between cell membranes. So you can kind of create a larger organism based on the fact that you've got two, cell membranes or two cells. And likewise, this gets bigger and bigger to the point that you've got, a tissue, an organ, a system, an organism. And each of them all kind of have their own little local kind of way of doing their thing. And biochemistry, organic, biology, they have done very good job of justifying that each of the, things like in embryology, that the local concentration of chemicals and the effect of the way that it turns on the DNA to make other molecules, to make enzymes, to be able to make structure, to make function, to use energy, etc. All of these things they're very well understood. They can be argued that they're all local. There isn't any kind of controlling factor that's making them operate the way they operate. But given the precedent of the quantum and the group entity that's associated with it, that forms as a result of having a group together, that we can say, it's possible that there is a group entity that's formed associated with the cell, group entity that's formed with each of the groups of cells, the tissues, the organ, the system, the organism, that it all has, that there is a group entity associated with it. And again, based on the precedent that we have a quantum which is very tightly controlled in terms of its function, and it's not well explained by just saying that we have local interactions. We'll see this more when we get into other kinds of the Mach-Zehnder interferometry, where you have two photon splitting, and you actually have the same photon going down two different paths and interfering with itself. And so you actually see the same kind of thing happening with many different types of quantum phenomenon. And the granddaddy of them all is entanglement, when you actually split an electron, I'm sorry, split a photon into two other photons that came from the original one, and you measure one, and the other one has to be exactly the amount that will cause it to conserve the energy and spin that was associated with the original one. So you actually have to have a complete conservation, and you have to do that at a speed of light. You have to do this at faster than the speed of light. You have to do that coordination of the two. In other words, there's a spirit, there's a connection, there's a group entity that is bound together. And quantum entanglement is actually the Fibber-McGee sock, the thing that we pick up and we notice everything comes out when we see that. So that concept of having, you know, a particle that conserves its state, and the two are dependent upon two parts of an original that was split, and those two parts need to actually have the same. They need to have the same total. They have the same magnetic polarization, the same electrical polarization. So the original started with a certain total. The sum of the two things that came from it have to have the same total. And that was what the whole Einstein, Podolsky, Rosen 1935 debate was about, was the fact that if you're going to have those apart and you can then separate them out, you know, a light year apart, and you measure it here and it instantly changes over there, to do that violates, you know, special relativity. So the speed of light is no longer the maximum rate of communication. And so something else is going on, but speed of light is very good at limiting things like actual fermions, actual bosons, how fast you can accelerate electron, how fast a photon can move. Both of those are very tightly regulated. You can't go faster than the speed of light with those. But if you do this particular kind of trick where you're actually looking at conservation of energy, conservation of spin, conservation of energy, whenever you look at that, you see that this actually, for the universe to conserve the amount of spin and polarization that was present in the original source, there actually has to be some other thing that's connecting them. The group entity concept solves this. We actually start with a group entity that's actually still part of the same group entity when the two spread apart, very far apart. When you measure one, the other one has to be exactly the opposite, or the amount that corresponds with the amount of energy and spin, the amount of polarization and spin that was associated with the original. And so conservation of energy requires, conservation of spin and energy require that you have an immediate communication so that we keep the bookkeeping exactly right. And I would say that this is the thing that's really at the center of the justification of saying that there is a group entity. There is this quantum which was split, and it's keeping track of it in itself. So there's a unified consciousness associated with it. Even though there's lots of conscious particles, there's a unified consciousness that is in both of them, and that is actually coordinating what the other one does. When you measure one, the other one's going to instantly be what it needs to be to conserve the spin and polarization of the system that we started with. And so that is the precedent, what we're using as our legal precedent, and saying we have evidence here that there is a group entity because there is this phenomenon of maintenance of spin and polarization. And so given that initial kind of premise of such a thing as a group entity, one from many, when that kind of precedent exists, we can say, well, what's the difference between adding that electron to an atom, and that or that nucleus having several different quarks in it, The answer is there isn't, because you can actually create a the atom actually becomes its own quantum of energy, and whenever it is split, like in fission, or it will then, the amount of energy associated with that will not be lost. And so those are the things that are going to be created to be the conserved entities that then go out and react also.
Split off and share qualities, but they like mimic and react.
The particles, it seems like this is a very gray area. Whenever you start saying we're doing things and we're not doing entanglement, we can go, well, we don't need any group entities here. We just, we split this off here, and we split that off there, and a certain amount of things went off to as photons, and it all adds up and it's fine. We don't have any, spooky action at a distance. We don't have things, light year apart that have to be coordinated together. So what need do we have for any kind of group entity in a situation like that? And the answer is you don't. But is it there anyway? What suddenly made it go from being something where you actually did need it, which is in the entanglement example? You really did need to have entanglement to explain that. Otherwise, you have the whole confusion we have now. I mean, you have what we have now. Right now, there are no answers. It is simply, it's poorly defined. This takes it out of that poorly defined category, and we just say, we're not going to worry about wave-particle duality anymore. We're just going to note that we've got photons that are made of polarization and spin. We've got atoms that are, we got electrons and quarks that are made of polarization and spin plus a naked conscious point. And that's all we've got. And we know they all form together as a particular cohort, and that cohort has associated with it a group entity. And the question then is, okay, does that fact that formed a group entity, does that imply that, when you've got a couple of them together, that they form a group entity? And I think, the evidence gets more and more murky the bigger you get. But, whenever you get things like, psychic phenomenon, there are, enough examples of it so that we don't think we need to argue whether it exists or not. You get people that when they're together and they know each other and they become bonded, and then they separate, and one of them gets into, a bad thing happens, and the other one feels it. And that type of thing is the kind of thing that points at a group entity that was formed out of the two people together. Did it prove there was a group entity? No, it doesn't. It just that we keep doing this analysis of everything that we do. We go, well, there's another thing that actually is consistent with a group entity. The thing that is the most puzzling and that people really get quite concerned about is the idea that we have all these group entities that are part of, we have all these consciousnesses that make up our bodies. And we've got as what appears to be a single consciousness, and dogs do too, etc. That what it was it that created that singleness of consciousness? And is that actually an example of a group entity? Or is that simply just a bunch of things that act together chemically, and there isn't any spirit involved in this? There's no consciousness, and consciousness just arose because we had enough complexity of the brain that it just eventually kind of just naturally consciousness sprang out of it, which is kind of the general materialist, viewpoint of where consciousness is just like, Well, you just put enough stuff together and eventually it becomes conscious. And what my point of view is that, well, I think that's in fact true, but I think there also is a group entity that's associated with it. And I think we call it a soul. I think that's the name of what the group entity associated with the configuration of what we have as a body. I think we call it a soul. Do we think with a soul? Maybe a little bit. It's kind of a little bit fuzzy. It does appear that we do think with our brain. Does it seem like we have a brain that is able to do all of these things without having a group entity that's controlling it? Seems like, everything kind of is able to kind of be this, mixture of things. It's just a cacophony of electrical stuff going on. And it does seem like if we want to actually focus on it, we can. We can just focus on one thing. We could just go, whoa, man, I've got stuff. I'm sitting on a chair and I hear sound in my voice. Hear the sound of my voice, and I've got air that's blowing by me, and oh my gosh, this is just too much. We can be overwhelmed by all of the stuff going on, or we actually can focus on one. And it does appear that the brain is the organ that is able to actually do this, and we can train ourselves to do it. And there's a whole huge amount of justification for saying the brain is very much in charge of all of these functions of, focus or sensation, motor, making decisions, dreaming, imagining, etc. All these things, you don't need to have a group entity type of explanation to say why all this is happening. All we're saying is that, is there such a thing as a group entity that actually is associated with the human frame? And I think the answer is yes. I think we can say, people see auras. People have all sorts of, psychic phenomena. People have near-death experiences. They have astral traveling. There's all sorts of things that are outside of what conventional science says is a valid thing to include in science, but nevertheless is phenomenon. And to say that it's all just imagination, or that it's all just what do we call it? It was just an accident. Something that's an error. It's an error of processing in your brain. That all these things, that none of it was actually real. It was all just an appearance. It's all fake. Actually, none of it exists. Stretches credibility.
Right. So what you're thinking is maybe more than thinking of some psychic experience as a hallucination or some kind of something that's not there, that it might be that whatever cocktail of particles make up our brain might somehow be stretching out, connected to other conscious points that exist around us, and potentially allow us to step outside of ourselves in some way, or at least connect to other places or see other places, possibly.
At the very least, what the thing that we're actually trying to solve in this panpsychism discussion, we're trying to come to a sense of satisfaction that this concept actually has validity. This actually is something that when it's useful, it corresponds with reality. There's actual stuff that happens. The psychic phenomenon, I believe, is the most obvious thing on the human level to justify including the concept of a psychic or a group entity that in some way communicates with another group entity, and there's a connection other than through the physical speed of light, physical limitations. There's actually a consciousness connection, just like the conscious point, connected through Christ with each other. This is connecting through Christ with each other, and we've opened up a portal so that we actually have a connection between us. We've bonded, we've entangled with each other. And all of these, there's one other phenomenon that's really important that we probably need to mention before we go, which is just simply that that we have in John 1:5, we talk about Christ being the light of men. In other words, the Spirit of Christ was actually another type of particle. We had grid points. We had the conscious, four types of conscious points, and we also have a soul. We have a soul point. We created with the mind of Christ. We actually can perceive and be. And I just watched last night a near-death experience video, and it was a gal that she died because she was taking too many diet pills, and she was losing her breath. And when she died, she left her body, and she said, "Wow, I can actually breathe. I'm actually alive now. This is actually me. Look at that. I'm looking down at my body. I've got this, person down there that I live inside of, and it's great to have that, that body to live in, but it's not me. This is me. I'm completely something. Who I am is completely something separate from that." And she then went on and visited with God and different things, and it was very beautiful and wonderful. And it wasn't her time, so she came back and she tells the story now, and she has a lot of influence and helps people, understand, a larger view of life. But that's just an example of, a consciousness that is. I don't believe that consciousness arose because of us having, DNA that multiplied and formed embryos and got mature and became, infant and grew up to be an adult. I don't think that was why we developed a spirit that really was us that could leave. I think we were given a spirit. The spirit and I use John 1 as my point of validation. I simply say, Christ was the light of men. It's like, well, what kind of thing does that mean? And this makes it mean something. This is the light of men. It's like, this is what you look out of. This is the part of you that's real. This is the part of you that was created in the image of God. This was just like Christ was, just like the Word, the Son was created in the image of God from the Father. This is where the Son was created. We were created the same way. We were created as the same level of character, that group entity surrounding the conscious point that we are, who we are, the gifting we were giving, the pattern that's us. That was made, and Christ made it, and we have the capabilities that he had. And hence we're valid lovers, valid companions. We can actually satisfy the Father in his desire for love by living his way of being.
Yeah. Well, it's a good summation, I think, of that's a good summary of how those things how panpsychism is relevant to this concept, and how they can operate together. But I mean, more so just kind of gives clarity to. I mean, we've had conversations that have touched on these things many times or a few times.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it gives it a sense of scale, I guess, almost, or it gives it,
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's kind of, I'm getting a better sense of scale and a better sense of the interconnectivity. Um, yeah,
So I
it,
think, just as far as, what we were trying to examine on this particular topic, we were trying to prove whether panpsychism was a valid topic. Could we overcome the combination problem? And I think we overcame the combination problem by simply noting that there appears to be an ability of the group entities to negotiate, to work together, whether they are, maintain their original, identity, which I think they do, and that they then, whenever they create a group entity together, they then are actually able to do what needs to be done to do the function of the combination,
yeah,
and they're able to be multiple parts that acts in unity. And so, for all intents and purposes, they are a unity, and they end up producing the result that you get and need to get to conserve energy, conserve spin, conserve polarization. You get the unity of the cellular mechanisms acting together to produce a coordinated motion. You've got a nervous system, which is very material, being able to prioritize on a chemical level to create a single, action. But just because you had a single action doesn't prove that you are having a single group entity that is now running you. But one, we have the Spirit of God that was given to us as a single group entity, which seems to be more of an observer. It doesn't seem like it directs things. It's more like it's there, it's watching, it hears and sees and feels everything, and it communes with God, I believe, all the time. And us with us with God, us with God, and God with us. But we have the animals too, and the animals appear to have a similar kind of nervous system, but I don't think that they were given the same spirit we were given. But I think their nervous system and their soul, the combination of all the parts that work together to create hierarchies of organs and systems and organism, I think it's adequate to serve as a co-pilot along with their nervous system. So we actually have a nervous system that works with a soul. And I think it opens up the possibility and allows for the reality of actual afterlife with our pets, the animals that we've loved. And we all want our pets to be with us. When we die, we don't want to go to heaven and have it just be harps. And we want to have, the people and the animals that we loved, with us. And I think that having a soul, which is this combination of all the things, but it creates its own kind of little tiny sense of, yeah, I've got all these parts, but it's me. I'm here. And I think there's enough of that kind of a joining of all of the subconscious parts, the parts that are constituents. I think it's enough to say that we actually did create a conscious point that is, or a group consciousness that's a singularity that actually does fulfill the function of the entity that we want to have live with us in heaven so that we can continue to love them.
hmm, hmm. Yeah, that's. I mean, I would love that. That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
we all do.
Yeah, I want that. Yeah,
Yeah, we all want it. And so the issue was, is this just fantasy? Are we just wishfully thinking? Have we kind of just, gone on out on some sort of philosophical, theoretical, tangent and, have nothing behind it and it isn't consistent? And how do we do it? And I think, the thing that is typically the deal killer when we're talking about actually incorporating a new entity, we're literally creating a group entity here. We're saying we're multiplying entities. Yes, we are. Does it simplify anything? Does it solve any problems? Is it real? And the answer is it solves a whole lot of problems. We've actually only got, group entities, and we've got, conscious points. And actually from that, we were able to create the whole universe. That's really simple. We have a few rules that the conscious points have to follow. We have a few rules that the group entities have to follow. They have to do this conservation thing. And they can kind of like meld together, and they might kind of like be more like a salad, than like a soup, then they're kind of a little bit,
Sure.
squished together as
Yeah.
opposed to kind of like being blended and melted and turned into an ingot. So I think there is enough precedent in the argument to say that we actually do have a group entity as an existent reality. The place where it's most obvious is in the quantum. The quantum, you literally cannot get anything smaller than a quantum. You cannot, the smallest quantum equals HF equals the Planck's constant, energy is equal Planck's constant times the frequency. The smallest frequency that you can get would be, 1 hertz of a Planck, having a Planck's constant. And, something smaller than that doesn't exist. It's something you can only have. You can't get smaller than a single unit of Planck's constant. That's something. And where did that come from? Who made that up? And this is definitely a group consciousness problem. You actually needed to have all those working together, following a rule. They had to have a rule. And they said, when we get together and get this many, this is where we stop. We can't get any smaller than that. And if we were going to add more, we actually have to add it in those layers. We have to add it in those amounts. And so we've got a conscious, a group entity very strongly indicated at the level of the quantum. Beyond that, it gets fuzzy. And we have more the paranormal type of psychic type of spiritual events that are the phenomenon that we would use to justify saying that such a thing even exists. But I think given the strength of the plausibility that there is a group entity at the quantum level, rather than just a bunch of conscious points, that we actually have precedent to say there is something that melds them together. The combination problem. We actually have a combination. There actually is something, and we can refer to something physical, and we can refer to the multiplicity underneath it and say that this combination actually is the an evidence of there being an actual group entity. And once you have the concept there, to say, well, that's really the only place that ever acts. You don't have that happen act anywhere else. It doesn't really operate anyplace else other than at the quantum. I think is to really ignore the precedent of how physical phenomenon are used extensively in multiple directions. In fact, that was the intent of the way that the creation was made. You don't just start with a consciousness and say, okay, we got God, and okay, that's good enough. The consciousness doesn't exist anyplace else except from God. And it's like, no, we got God and we got consciousness, and we use consciousness everywhere. We got spin. We use spin everywhere. Use polarization everywhere. Use group entities everywhere. And so that my point is that this is a concept that we're generalizing. We're saying this is an existent entity. Existent entities are used more than once in the creation by referencing how other things are used more than once.
Yeah. Good. Good. I'm gonna have to soak it in more. I'm gonna have to think all that through a lot more, but I think that's a really good way to describe. I feel like it makes panpsychism make sense through that lens and through the approach that I mean, when I heard of it, I was like, this is really, really similar to what you've been saying, but there are different details that I feel like you having solved the what did you call it? It's not the combination problem.
Yeah, well, we were solving the combination problem.
But working on that, it definitely yeah, it definitely makes sense within the philosophy of panpsychism. Um, I think they just kind of complement each other in
Mhm.
ways.
This is just one version of panpsychism. I find the other versions of panpsychism flawed. I think for all the reasons that we just talked about, they don't describe it well. There were other aspects of panpsychism we did not talk about. One is the big one is qualia. What is redness? Where does redness exist? We did not talk about that. That's another topic. We'll deal with that one. That one's a big one. But this was just simply to establish that the concept of panpsychism, in particular the group entity, as as the solution to the combination problem. And
Yeah,
that was the major point of this particular analysis.
good, good. Well, uh, getting a little late, getting a little late today. Are you guys good to finish up this conversation and
Yeah, I think so. I think that, oh,
different places that we can lead to from there in future conversations? But
yeah, no, I think that this is a good spot, and I think we've established that this is a reasonable building block for us to continue to use as we assemble the rest of the theory and analyze it. And we'll just look and see whether it continues to be a valuable, or is it extra? Did we include something that's actually unnecessary? Did we make it more complicated than it needed to be? Or is this actually a minimum complexity that we actually needed to include? So yeah, this is a great spot to conclude. I think we covered the topic to my satisfaction.
cool. Yeah, no, same. Yeah, again, always please record or send me the recording, and I always like to comb through there and see what I missed the first time through because sometimes it's layers, and I hit the wall, and then there's a couple more walls that I'm stuck focusing on a word or an idea, and then um and
And
it
hence it enhanced the material for another
right,
conversation.
right. Well, the idea is that I slowly get more and more knowledgeable, and my intelligence level will grow through this whole process, and one day I will know what everything in the universe means.
Well, that's what we're trying to do. We're actually we want a big picture on this. We're trying to learn how to live well in this universe. And so, if this helps you live well or to inspire you to say, yes, there is actually a standard to live to that is absolute, just like there's an absolute grid point. There's there's actual particles. that actually exist. God actually exists. Morality actually exists. The Bible actually is God's revelation, and it does tell us the ways that we should live, that are actually please Him. If we've done that, that's all we need. That's our end point. We're just trying to live well. That's all.
Good. Well, thank you for your time talking. That's I mean hugely beneficial, and I have some questions that were answered, and more questions came from it. So let's keep going. And yeah, thank you again.
Okay. Have a good night.
Awesome. You too.